All right, so anyone who listens to the podcast now, thank you again, and you'll know that I grew up in Asia for a while. So a year and a half ago or so, when Kani Releasing was introduced as a new label, I was immediately smitten with their Being Natural and second release of Cain and Abel, and so I've been tracking very closely with them ever since then, and I'm so excited today that Ariel Esteban Cayer from one of the co-founders of Kani is joining the podcast. So Ariel, thank you so much.
Hello, hi there. Thank you for thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So we were talking about this a little bit before we started, but you're living in Hong Kong now.
Yeah, we are. We're based here in Hong Kong, which yeah, just kind of so happened to be the case when we decided to start this endeavor. And yeah, so it comes as a surprise to people maybe sometimes, considering we distribute films in North America and sort of are mostly geared towards that market. But it all makes perfect sense from sort of a workflow perspective and a geographical perspective for us to stay here. Yeah.
Totally. And just on the 5% chance that anybody doesn't is not super familiar with Kani, the name itself comes from has a connection to Yasujiro Otsu, right?
It does. Yeah, we wanted something. So yeah, Kani, the whole pitch was essentially to build a distribution company, a Blu-ray label company that would aim to introduce or reintroduce Asian cinema from what we felt could be a perspective that that was a bit different or a bit more local, to every which film. And so in thinking of a name for the company, we wanted two things. We wanted something sort of short and catchy, and also something that could uh, be both nerdy but also kind of delineate that. So Kani came about. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Ozu's cinema, of course, and so Kani, which means crab in Japanese, but also means sort of fake crab, like the fake crab you can buy.
Okay.
Um, um, uh, you know, um, but Kani essentially being the nickname that he gave the custom made tripod that he devised so that he could capture these iconic tatami level shots
Ah,
that he's so known for. And so if you watch documentaries about his work, it's like a museum piece. It's like this small little red coated tripod that's beautiful. And so it seemed to encapsulate all these things, right? The sort of shift of perspective, the sort of handmade feel that we wanted to give our releases, short and catchy, kind of sounds like Kino.
uh-huh.
And then having a sort of animal mascot is always good. So it's like really kind of hit all the notes that we wanted for the company name. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, and even, one of the things you just mentioned was this idea that you want to find some films that are local to the countries they're made in. And, that's one thing that's so interesting about Otsu is that his films are so Japanese,
Yeah.
yet so universal kind of at the same time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's this idea that, the market is, we came at a time where, Blu-ray was doing really well, generally speaking. We're talking not that long ago, like 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Um, and aware that, the sort of saturation of certain genres on the market, or rather very aware of the ways that Asian cinema is presented in the West. I used to program for a very long time for the
Okay.
Fantasia International Film Festival in Montreal,
Oh, great.
and which is a genre film festival, and it's an Asian film festival. And coming from that experience to very being kind of aware of the type of films that work well or get a free pass by virtue of being ticking certain boxes, whether that's horror or martial arts or
Yeah.
all these kind of movements that we've come to know, right? J horror, K horror, the Shaw martial arts films, and so we were interested in these boxes, both as a sort of something that is out there already and something that we can sort of subvert or kind of work around. And so in a way we sort of aim to sort of bring films that are a little bit outside of these prerequisites, right? um, and so in doing so, I think it's like effortlessly kind of you kind of fall outside of category, and therefore you fall outside of things that require a bit more contextualizing because they work on a level that is, as you say, with Ozu's films, it's like they're extremely Japanese, and that becomes its own thing.
Yeah.
And our films are extremely whatever they may be talking about, and so that becomes
Hmm.
its own sort of flavor, its own thing.
So as I have a personal interest in films that don't tell the audience everything they need to know. Give the audience an opportunity to kind of piece things together and sort of trust the audience that they're going to be able to figure it out for the most part. And I think that's one of the things that I love so much. So maybe we'll get into some titles here in just a second. But for the ones I've seen from you, that's one common theme I think is that for the films that I've seen, they just drop you into this world. So whether it's Malaysia spoof kind of satire comedy of Sellout, right, or Viva Erotica of Category 3, or we're talking about Being Natural, like you're just dropped into these worlds and you kind of have to catch up. But honestly, it's so easy to do it. I mean, these films are, I think you're able to find somehow these kind of gems of movies that are so easy to kind of sink into and just go along with and kind of go for the ride.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think we handpick every film very carefully. It has to resonate with us first, and I think that part of it is cultivating a sort of approach to curation or approach to picking films where the films themselves, you define it as a world, but I think also one could call it a sort of there's a complexity to them, right? And it doesn't mean that they need to be uh, inaccessible or difficult. A lot of our films are more on they're fun and they're easy to get into, as you say, but they do have this sort of complexity, cultural complexity or regional complexity or sort of thematic complexity that makes it, we hope, rewarding for the audience, even if it's a rom-com, even if it's a comedy, even if it's a sort of horror tinged drama. We hope that there's something there that people haven't seen before, right? And something, rewarding in terms of layers or themes, for sure.
It certainly has been for me. You, the last question I have before we start talking about some of the films, and we can kind of go back and forth on the label a little bit as well. But I'm always interested to know, first of all, what made you decide to kind of start your own distribution house, publishing house, whatever you want to say, and then secondly, how you chose OCN, because those two things don't have to go together, right?
For
Although it
sure.
seemed like to be a good fit for you.
No, for sure. Like I mentioned, I've been a programmer first for a long time and used to program for festivals, and out of that experience, I was programming mostly Asian cinema, if it wasn't
Yeah.
obvious. Out of that experience came a sort of frustration about, you know, seeing the process, right? Working very hard to find films outside of a certain beaten path, or even when working with big companies, just working hard to find films and then championing them for a very small window of time, and then seeing those films not really have a life beyond the couple of very specialized festival screenings that myself and other programmers might be giving them, or myself and other festivals might be giving them. And so I think for Pearl, my partner, it was similar, where she worked in film sales for a long time, and
Okay.
trying to get films to distributors, trying to get films to festivals, and again being kind of confronted with this idea of who chooses and what gets to the market, and so on and so forth. And so it really came out of our shared frustration with seeing films that we personally really love kind of fall by the wayside, and thinking, hey, we know how this industry works. Let's just try to contribute our small bit of our sensibility to that landscape. And then in designing the thing, OCN offered a compelling model for us to sort of start as a first time Blu-ray company,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we'd been Vinegar Syndrome fans for a long time, and kind of really enjoyed the way that they packaged their films and everything. And so it was kind of a yeah, we reached out with the idea, and they welcomed us with it, and it became I think an interesting fit for us, at the time. And so that's very simple how that came to be.
I'm happy you're there. Selfishly, it's so easy to buy and keep up when it's on the website, at the beginning of the month. Um, the other thing, I guess, just that if I can find a common theme in the films that I've seen from what you have produced, at least, there seems to be, in addition to the complexity you mentioned, and in addition to some of the world building we've talked about, there also seems to be like a heart to them, like there's like a whether it's a connection between family that is a bit unusual but sincere, or whether it's people put in kind of difficult situations like Spacked Out, for example. It's a very difficult situation to be in, but there's still a connection there and like a family there, right? Like I think I don't know, everything seems to have like this kind of heart behind it, and I'm wondering, is that an intentional choice, or do you think that's just a matter of sort of your tastes and how it lines up as you pick these up?
Yeah, probably the latter. I mean, I love hearing it though. It's like this it's kind of I guess this bit of sort of meta analysis, right? Because ultimately we didn't set out with a theme, or we didn't set out with. I mean, we set out with a bit of a mission, of course, in the back of our heads, but you know, there's so many circumstances to the way that the lineup is curated, that the way that we can acquire and license films and all these things. So it really is mostly circumstantial or luck or whatever. But it is true that this idea of the taste sort of ends up creating a sort of logic to the
Yeah,
whole thing that is really fun to hear people talk about. This sort of hard is I think probably if I were to self-analyze, probably also has to do with um, yeah, wanting to present films that are a bit outside of traditional genres, and therefore you know has us sort of stay clear of certain tropes. Maybe we're not very mean-spirited people. We're not looking for that kind of content, or we like things that are a bit that have a political resonance to them, that make us feel good and happy,
yeah.
and it's sort of there are hard-hitting moments in our so-called filmography, but and definitely sort of variations in tone. But I think that yeah, I guess I'll have to say I'm happy to hear you say that.
No, it was one thing that I was just very shock or striking to me as I was going through some of the stuff, because yeah, it's quite beautiful. Let's just start even with maybe the first one. So Being Natural came out. Justin the Liberty describes it as a combination of Otsu and Miike. And I don't hate that description. I don't know, just like anything said in one sentence, it's not complete. But I don't hate that description. One thing that struck me, if anybody is on the fence about taking a chance on Being Natural, it's quite, first of all, it's quite funny. It's definitely, I think I don't know, but dark comedy is the perfect way to say it, but it's a little bit of
Yeah.
a darker comedy. But it's quite funny, and I think the main character, he has more depth than it seems like he would at first, even before things go crazy in the last act. Um, but he's a very complex, like his character is fascinating to watch. Just kind of the way he has, the basic plot, right, is he's kind of takes over or helps with his fishing pond, and there's a family that moves in, and he's freeloading in a house, and they want the house for a business, and there's kind of this conflicts that's created in the neighborhood, and things get a little bit out of hand, and then really out of hand. Uh, but in the middle of all this, I think, is this uh, story about the way that there's like a generational story between the uncle and this guy, and the way family kind of takes care of each other. And then there's this character that sort of like it's a Japanese movie, so Japanese like Luis Guzman, I think. I don't know the best way to describe him, right? who's like a friend and just sort of like the comic relief a lot of times. But they have a really sweet relationship with him, and a lot of time he breaks the tension just by like pushing in and like not kind of giving up. And I don't know, like the whole story, I was just like laughing and also like touched by it until it just gets insane. And I think people should experience the way it gets insane.
Yeah, I think for us it was a good. I mean, it came to be in a couple of ways. Of course, I this is a film that I had programmed first and stayed close with. I had stayed close with the team, and then we wanted a strong film to open the lineup with, and we wanted something that would also signify, um, yeah, our sort of intention. Like in terms of both the kind of classical bent, that's the Ozu part, and then the unconventional, subversive, surprising part, which is the touch. Let's call it a touch of Takashi Miike. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and Tadashi Nagayama, he's a sort of young and up and coming, still is. I mean, he's not so young anymore, but still up and coming director in Japan, and we felt that it would be a good thing to showcase. And sorry, I don't know what to say. I think you described it perfectly in this way, and it's a film that just stuck with us as something quite delightful and surprising. And then we also took a risk in sort of dressing it up, or rather marketing it by burying the twist in it, because we wanted to sort of preserve that surprise, and have people think that they might be buying a sort of rural drama and then turn into something a bit weirder, right? Because
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
how I saw the film, and this is how I think the film should be seen. So
It's if you can have a sincere like what the fuck moment, that's like amazing, right?
yeah, exactly. And sincere is the word. It's an extremely sincere film that gets into sort of politics of eviction and politics of place, and while also being extremely accessible and extremely funny, and just having a good heart to it. So yeah, everything we were about this film sort of represented. So we were very happy to open with it. Yeah.
And do you sometimes or do you ever get theatrical rights for these as well?
We do increasingly so. We're actually in the middle right now of a theatrical run for Spacked Out, Lawrence Lyle's Spacked Out,
Oh, cool.
which we opened at Metrograph, and is screening in various theaters in the U.S. Currently,
I have
uh,
to imagine it's
here in
doing well.
Canada as well. It's doing quite well. Yeah, it's doing very well. Um, People are responding to it. Has all that sort of Hong Kong flavor that you would want from a film from that era. The sort of story of queer girlhood and girlhood just in general is also kind of resonating. So we're really happy with how that's doing. But yeah, we're picking up theatrical when we can, how we can, and most importantly, it's one thing to pick up the rights. It's also just sort of like we're at the of the company now where we feel like we do have an audience to put these films out
Mm-mm.
theatrically. So that's part of the shift that's been happening too. It's been quite exciting actually.
That's
Yeah.
good. And as far as the Blu-ray goes, was that also your fastest selling one on Ocean?
No, our fastest selling one, it was second, I believe, if I'm keeping numbers correctly. Um, our fastest selling one was our release of Q Zhong's A New Old Play, which
Oh,
really
really?
took us by surprise, actually.
Yeah.
We thought, here's a art house film from I want to say 2020, 2021,
Beautiful,
my bad.
beautiful cover though. Really, really beautiful cover.
Thank you. And that's the original artwork from the director is also he's a celebrated painter, and so he provided us with a wealth of materials, which you can see in the booklet, but also for the design itself. These are all full scale full scale paintings that he did in
Yeah.
preparation for the film. Um, like Akira Kurosawa used to do actually.
Yeah,
And so
I was
he
about
he
to.
would paint every character, he would paint entire scenes, and And yeah, that became the original poster, and he provided that, and we kind of adapted it to the slipcover, and it became yeah, one of our nicest looking releases and one of our fastest selling ones too. For a Locarno art house, 3 hour long Chinese epic, it was really heartening to see it do so well.
Yeah, well, good luck trying to predict the behavior of the OCN fans, I guess. But I'm so glad that it sold out for you. That's amazing, or
Yeah,
sold so well for you. That's amazing.
yeah, we've given up on trying to predict what works and what doesn't. We have a couple of guidelines at this point, but we're also trying, not to let them dictate things too much, because you're totally right. It's quite unpredictable.
Sometimes something just hits. Um, that's good. The other one I thought you might mention, I hope this has been a good seller for you, is Viva Erotica.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It might be our best seller, but not our fastest selling
okay.
disc. Um, on the topic of things that work quite well with the genre audience or the OCN audience, or however you want to define that, is yeah, Hong Kong films from the 80s and 90s. Something that to what we were saying earlier, every label is doing, or more or less at the moment. 88 films have made a great niche of Hong Kong films, and Vinegar Syndrome is releasing them too. We're actually helping them a lot with those releases here in Hong Kong, as you can imagine. And as far as what we're trying to do is bring a sort of complementary or kind of alternative perspective to those films and that era. Looking at things like, yeah, like Spacked Out or Viva Erotica, which is sort of a meta look at the industry or at the phenomena of like Category 3 films. And yeah, we have a title coming up, which is a Hong Kong New Wave classic that, hopefully, yeah, as you'll see, kind of, yeah, contextualizes things in some way too.
If it's coming out in February, it's going to be okay to talk about it because this will drop after Feb 1. If it's coming
Oh,
out
great.
after that,
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah. No, then we can definitely talk about it. So our next release is Alex Chung's Men on the Brink, which
oh
is
wow, great.
the kind of model for a lot of the undercover cop and undercover triad Hong Kong films that followed. And so, everybody's very familiar with Infernal Affairs and films of that ilk. And so it was kind of important to us, or a good opportunity for us to sort of show, yeah, the sort of the OG of that.
Yeah.
And so this is how we're trying to approach sort of the Hong Kong films that we do.
I now that I know a little bit more about Kani, hearing from you, Viva Erotica means even more to me now because it's like the most Kani category 3 film possible. It's like this really sweet, heartwarming, story about like not judging people by the fact that they're in this industry where there was a lot of kind of people were looked at differently for being a part of it, right? It was like you're kind of
Sure,
a
sure.
forgotten part of society to go join this, and yet they were producing some amazing movies.
For
Yeah.
sure, for sure. And it's like, I don't know what it is, but it's almost this like this desire for like this desire on our end for like a postmodern gesture to everything or something. It's like we're distributed by OCN and BS, and they do a lot of, classic pornography and classic sort of Category 3 stuff. So we're always thinking like, oh, how do we how do we do it, but do it a bit different? And so let's do let's do the boogie nights. Let's do the Hong Kong boogie nights of it
Yeah.
all.
Oh, what a
Um,
great. I didn't even think about that. That's right. This is the Boogie Nights for category 3.
yeah, 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 totally.
That's exactly it. Holy cow. Um, Amazing. I'm gonna start talking about it that way now. That's amazing. Okay, so the only other one, other than what we've talked about so far, that I saw pretty quickly, just because I grew up in Jakarta, like I was mentioning a bit, was Sellout. I know it's Malaysian, but similar language and all. So this one at first caught me a bit off guard because they start talking as if they're like there's like a narrator, like they're introducing the story or whatever, and then you kind of quickly get into what's going on. But this is a very sweet, funny, like I hate to say surprisingly funny, but having lived in Jakarta, a lot of the stuff that's made in Indonesia was not funny.
Mm,
Now, for one of the problems was what was played on TV over there was a lot of like wealthy people's kids that just wanted to have a spot on TV.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it just, you know, by the nature of it was not necessarily going to be of like the highest quality writing. Um, so I didn't know much about Malaysian cinema, honestly. As close as I was to it, I haven't seen that much. But Sellout is very funny. Like it's very
Yeah.
funny, very well written.
Yeah, I think that film is important to sort of place in its context where it came from. If you speak to Junan, its director, um, he says that he wanted to make a film. At the time of, um, I I might be misquoting this, but what they would call the sort of the new Malaysian, the sort of new wave, the sort of new
Okay.
Malaysian wave, and these were slow cinema festival fare that would go to Venice, Locarno, and things like that, and that tended to be of a certain mold, right? Of the sort of following in the footsteps of, let's say, Tsai Ming Liang or a Pichat Pong,
Okay.
Verasetaku,
Hmm.
sort of that motion.
Yeah.
And I think Junan personally felt a little bit kind of irritated by the sort of copycat slow cinema that was coming out in the early 2000s to sort of throughout the 2000s. This comes out in 2009, I believe. It's 2008. Um, and essentially wanted to make the antithesis of that, right? Something quite funny, something quite upbeat, and God forbid a musical on top of it too, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what he set out to do, and as a result, it kind of exists. I want to say to this day as almost a bit of a UFO in the sort of Malaysian film landscape. Because it has that sort of sensibility that you don't really find quite often. I think that Thai cinema as a unit, if I may generalize, has sort of accommodated more different tones and sort of energies and so on. But I think that a small industry like the Malaysian film industry is still very reliant on what gets shown in festivals and
Hmm.
this and that. And so how films get funded, through various festival grants and whatnot, co-production grants and whatnot. So the what it takes to sort of break mold is a bit, it might be a bit, the requirements of that might be a bit higher. And so I think Sellout, and then Sellout ended up going to Venice and doing all the festivals too. So it's not so much about that necessarily, but it had to be done. It had to be done in this way to sort of dare make something so different. And it's a film that we had in mind from the very beginning and took a lot of doing and sort of clearing the rights for. And so we really went all out with that package.
That's actually a perfect segue. So one of the questions I was curious about is, um, we have you ever met or spoken to two people living in Hong Kong as well, named Mike Leader and Arne Venema? Do you know them at all?
I'm familiar with them by
Okay,
name, but I'm not close to them.
that's okay. The reason I'm asking is, you know, they do a lot of commentaries, and I believe Mike is a casting director for stuff, so he's sort of like in the film industry there and things.
Yeah.
But they don't actually negotiate rights and that kind of stuff. Like they're not actually a label, right? So they're more just sort of for hire, I guess, to say it that way, right? But what you're doing is interesting because you're going from Hong Kong, which granted, you have an advantage of time zones, which is good. But you know, you're not putting out Chinese films like you're putting out some, but you're putting out films from Malaysia and Japan and Philippines, like everything, right? So, are you having to learn how to negotiate rights country by country and person by person? Like, how does that process work for y'all?
um I'm finding that it is, I mean, it really is a case by case basis
Okay.
with these things, and it's something that for me has been an interesting learning curve because I've worked on that side of the industry to some capacity, right? As a programmer, you're not clearing rights for commercial exploitation, but you're booking films, and so you find yourself having to contact rights holders in all capacities, whether that's a producer, a sales agency, a director personally who might be, who might own the entirety of his film, or might just simply be, booking the film himself, and sort of all these scenarios coexist. But what's been interesting for, at least for me personally, coming from a festival background, is realizing how much more complex things get when it becomes when things concern creating a product
Okay, okay.
with a certain shelf life and longevity, and so, yeah, it's been interesting because it truly is a case by case basis. Sometimes it's very straightforward, and sometimes it takes a long time, and there might be some resistance that has often nothing to do with you, just simply to do with the way that rights, sort of exist, or don't, and so you're trying to kind of it's detective work. It's a lot of you have to be sort of tenacious and gracious, and kind of approach every film, every project in the sort of in the way that it presents itself. It's
Can,
yeah.
can I ask you to double click on one thing you said? You said you have to be a detective where there's rights and also where they don't exist. That's an interesting comment. So what does that mean? I can guess what that means, but I'd be interested to hear like, do you have any experience, either generally or specifically, where you just couldn't find rights, but you were able to put out the film?
Oh no, that in that instance you wouldn't be able to. It's more of a
Okay,
case.
okay.
Yeah, it's more of a case of um, sometimes paper. What we call the chain of titles, or the paper trail of any specific film production, or any specific film, is messy, tangled. People pass, companies fold, film production companies are acquired by other entities. All these things. Therefore, things are just simply not clear, not kosher,
Mm-mm.
not exploitable in a way that protects all parties.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what I meant. The lack thereof is just a lack of a proper chain of titles. And
Okay.
so that's something that, I think any label can speak to that, especially as you go back in time and try to license older films. The structure of producing a film, and the sort of the companies that are created, and the way that rights are split up can be very, very complex. And so, you add 30 years to that equation, and then things get messy. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
just picking one country, just out of curiosity. This is just a very fascinating topic for me. Say, so Philippines, right?
totally.
Lino Brocka, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, Lino Brocka. You did Cain and Abel.
yeah,
Um, I imagine if there's any classic Filipino director who's been preserved, it might be Lino Brocka, right? So I
yeah,
imagine the
absolutely.
rights for that would be easier. Oh,
Yes
okay,
and no. Yes
okay,
and
okay,
no. It's an ongoing It's been an ongoing. Let's just say it's been an ongoing project of ours
okay,
to get more of his films out.
okay.
And we've had great success, actually, recently, and have put things in motion for a few of his films.
Oh,
But
cool.
frankly, a lot of other films of his are either lost, or just in the Philippines in general, or rights are just tangled in a certain way that makes things hard to license.
Interesting.
And even if one would be able to license films, and this is true of I would say, any Southeast Asian country, uh, the elements might not be available for
Mm,
a restoration, up to par with what one would expect from a Blu-ray release. So it's been an interesting journey for us to sort of navigate all these things at once, right? Cain and Abel was lucky because the rights had been sorted by essentially the company that restored the film, which is ABS-CBN in the Philippines. They're a broadcaster,
okay.
who have essentially taken on themselves to restore a lot of the Filipino film heritage, with
Oh, wow.
with 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 the elements that they that they have access to. And so, the Cain and Abel release for us was, right away, it was like it's a second release, but it all happened simultaneously, right? So it was like one of our first things, and immediately we were sort of confronted with all these questions of certainly rights, but also, the extent to which films can be restored if the elements are quote unquote subpar, right? Especially in a industry or in a sort of in a market where
Yeah.
it's all about the latest 4K, top 4K scan of a original
Sure,
negative
sure,
that
sure.
was pristine and kept in a vault, right? Like how do we achieve a good presentation with films that might have been, restored locally in the Philippines?
Well, speaking of that, I mean, that's perfect. So the opposite end of the spectrum, at least in the Philippines, I don't think that Lupita Concio is a household name internationally. Maybe in the Philippines she is. But was this a different challenge than a Lena Brokov film? Did this present a different type of
Um,
challenge?
no, similar actually. Similar idea where it's a local restoration of
Okay,
the best available element. So we're very
okay.
aware that, for example, the first reel, they had to completely reconstruct.
Wow.
And then as you watch our transfer, you can see the quality of the first 9 minutes or so is not up to scuff, and then it kind of gets better. And it's something that, yeah, to what I was saying with Kane, it's like it was both this thing where we at first we felt somewhat uneasy. It's like, oh, people are gonna rip us apart, like DVD Beaver, or gonna, they're gonna like
Uh,
screenshot the hell out of it, and
uh-huh.
call it a subpar transfer. And then we just kind of sat down and we're like, no, this is like, we're working on a sort of film historical project here. We're working on sort of making these films available, and dealing with very concrete sort of socioeconomic realities, which is to say, there's always going to be thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to restore a Hollywood film and to restore it again for an upscale format and whatever.
Hmm, hmm.
But this might be the best that Once a Moth gets for now, and certainly going forward as the materials continue to deteriorate,
Yeah,
because um, they might not be kept in the best conditions, just by virtue of climate, and economics of where the film is from. And so it's all these questions that we really wrestled with at the beginning, and it became almost a sort of unlearning process of both recognizing the market that we're working in, but also recognizing ultimately we want to make these films available, and we want to, there's almost um, this sort of, the kind of, what's the word, this uh, the way the technology determines what is being seen, right? At
yeah.
some point we kind of wanted to break through those limitations, and yeah, make the films available.
I mean, for what it's worth, I'm only one person, but I view it slightly differently. I think like a lot of 40, 50-year-old international films or films not made from the US or not made in France or Italy where they stress preservation so much.
Yeah.
I view it more as like similar to like a silent film almost in a way, right? It's like we're lucky to have these things, right?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And if you, as soon as you kind of get a sense of the fact that these elements survived at all,
yeah,
in the tropical weather, in
yeah,
the humidity, through various political regimes and whatnot, through various corporate dissolutions and change
yeah.
of rights and titles. It is a minor miracle, and I think that it's something that, yeah, we certainly cannot stress enough, and we're trying to work through, and and other labels might look at these transfers and go, ah, not good enough, but we certainly are looking at things sort of contextually, and
Mm,
making
mm,
the making decisions based on that.
mm.
Absolutely.
Uh, Bit of a random question, but just this is something I meant to ask earlier, but I just kind of thought of it again now. So one of the things I was curious about is my time in Southeast Asia. It was impossible to go an hour without talking about food in some capacity. Right? Food is such a part of culture there. And like, where are we gonna go? What stall are we gonna try? Or where are we going for lunch? Or what's for dinner? Like, but it's very much like a social thing,
Totally.
right? It's like there's a big tie between social eating and food. So a lot of the art house movies, I mean, the extreme example would be something like Tempopo, where it's like so baked into some of the stories. But even just a lot of the Asian, especially Chinese movies or movies from Hong Kong, if it's more the art house films, people are eating just because it's like a, I don't even think the writers and directors think about it, right? They're just sort of like, they just build eating into the stories without thinking. One of the things I was curious about, this is a bit of a weird question, but the movies that I've seen, other than being natural, where it's ramen is a part of the plot, but almost in like a joke or like a satire kind of thing. Food is not as much of a focus of a lot of these movies that I've seen so far, and I'm curious if there's anything so bear with me, it's a weird question, but it's something I was thinking about. Okay, so you talk about films that are like countercultural in some capacity or not what you would expect in some capacity. Um, have you seen any commonalities in the personalities and the directors you're interviewing where like they themselves are sort of countercultural and they themselves maybe have like problems with the countries they live in and so they express it in like different ways, sometimes through comedy, sometimes through drama, but like they're somehow like speaking against the common culture in some way.
Absolutely. I think this is just what we like, what we are like that too, I suppose,
Okay, okay.
and what we gravitate towards. Definitely. I can't speak to every director in our lineup, of course, but you know, it comes through in the stories that they tell and the ways that they make
Yeah,
films. Masashi Yamamoto, absolutely, right? He's an old punk, a
yeah.
punk at heart to this day, and these films are very much a reaction to the Japanese economic bubble, a sort of the push for globalization. They're very punk in spirit, as you can tell immediately from watching his films. And to me, it's like he's the missing link between Shinya Tsukamoto and sort of Kiyoshi Kurosawa and that sort of generation. He's kind of the outcast of that generation in many ways. Probably of his own doing, of staying willfully independent and willfully punk in spirit and all these things. Um, the shared commonalities with sharing a DOP with Jim Jarmusch, for example, sort of also positions him in this sort
Mm-hmm.
of no wave, you know, post punk aesthetic almost, right? One would
Yeah,
one
yeah,
could
yeah.
argue. Um, Daisuke Miyazaki, who we work with often and will keep working with, I suppose I can say as a teaser, is also very critical of Japan as an institution and of many things, many sort of social sort of aspects of being Japanese, and I think that comes across in his films always. Lino Brocco was extremely political.
Yes.
Um, you know, Tadashi Nagayama's film is political in that sense of opposing worldviews and sort of talking about when what impeding on someone's freedom with sort of your own. And yeah, the ramen aspect as opposed to the health food craze, and things like
Uh-huh.
that, and these things being a sort of national marker of national identity almost, which
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
which we also labored really hard to put across in the packaging, the disc and the
Definitely.
inside. So no, absolutely, all of and I think it's just a virtue of or a product of what we like, what we kind of gravitate to in terms of stories and themes. How that relates to food, or I don't know if that's where you were going, but um, yeah, I don't know. We love food as well, and obviously, and it's a big social thing for us. And I do think that it is in many ways uh, peppered throughout our films. Definitely, I can think Being Natural has that food element to it. Um, a New Old Play definitely has a lot of eating in the sort of afterworld or lack of eating due to poverty and things like that. Great dinner scenes in Bullets Over Summer. I don't know, it's there, but we haven't yet made like released a food centric film. Although we have a fruit centric film coming up.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
so yeah, yeah, and to subversion, yeah. I guess I also maybe wanted to mention Akiko Oku, who makes films in a more conventional mold. Tremble all you want, but brings a sort of a feminist edge to them that is
Okay.
um, not common in sort of Japanese mainstream cinema. So that's just what we enjoy, I suppose.
No, no, no. I love it. Thank you for going down that path. And I will say, when I found that y'all lived in Hong Kong, that's the first thing that my mind went to, because it's probably the best food scene in the world, right? I mean, it has to be. Unless you're into, like, French cuisine or something, I guess you could go to France. But outside of like traditional European cuisine, I don't think there's better food anywhere than Hong Kong, as far as diversity and quality across the diversity and everything. So that's one thing that, regardless of political regime, that's one thing that I've always wanted to spend like significant time in Hong Kong, just to kind of like get really fat.
Yeah, the food is phenomenal here, and yeah, I've probably gained a lot of weight. Well, not probably, I have gained a lot of weight since living here. Yeah, it's a very social thing to do, and it's a very there's no shortage of restaurants to try and sort of specificities to try. Although
Oh yeah,
I have to say we're also getting increasingly interested in going to mainland China more and kind of eating a lot more food up there because that's also phenomenal.
I bet. Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's a good place to eat for sure.
Are you able to transfer pretty easily between? Like, can you just kind of drive into the country if you want?
Oh, totally.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, I for myself I had to get a visa, but now that that's done, it's fairly easy. Yeah.
Huh, very interesting. Um, okay, well, for me, that's a pretty good intro to Kani Releasing. Let's see, what questions am I not asking? What do you do outside of Blu-ray publishing and a little bit of theatrical distribution you talked about? Is there other parts of Kani?
A little bit to an extent. We'll increasingly try to distribute the films in the best way we can, whether that is um, launching them theatrically, whether before the Blu-ray or after the Blu-ray, and increasingly trying to place them with relevant partners for VOD and things like that. Um, we recently placed the two Masashi Yamamoto films on the Criterion channel, which we are really happy about because they're then allowed to sort of really exist
Definitely.
in the canon and in the sort of body of work that makes sense for them, right? They're right there next to all the great Japanese filmmakers
Hmm.
and kind of complete that that sequence in the way that we wanted to. And so, while also being next to Jim Jarmusch and the sort of all the other and Edward Yang, the other connections that you can draw from the sort of Pan Asian approach that Yamamoto had. And so, increasingly trying to place films like that when we can, and we'll continue to do so, especially as we go forward into our third year here.
Third year. Oh, so I said year and a half earlier, but has it been 2 years now? And you're about to go into your third year?
Yeah, 2022, 23, yeah, and then 24. Yeah.
Okay, wow, that's great. Congratulations for making it that long.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
Thank you.
What's your, roughly speaking, like, do you have to keep like a 3 to 6 month backlog or something to work with OCN? Like, do they have any requirements as far as how many films have to be kind of in the backlog at any time?
Yeah, I mean, manufacturing deadlines are quite a ways ahead, so we have
Okay,
to, like we're already looking into, it's February, we're looking into, June and July
okay,
releases, and essentially, we did 9 films in our first year, we did 6 this past year, and then are working on a bit of a, almost more of a monthly kind of rhythm Though I don't want to jinx it, but it's really kind of, trying, for us, it's trying to give every film the most attention that it can, and kind
Mm.
of being flexible to, we joke internally and get annoyed at some releases that we've pushed forward, and but that's always because, oh, there's like an interesting development or something like that, whether it's art related or special features related, and trying to figure all of that out.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so yeah, increasingly trying to have a more sort of steady output. Yeah.
Speaking of special features, am I crazy or did Viva Erotica, did it say subtitles by Pearl?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. So Pearl's been doing a lot of subtitling work, actually,
Wow.
not only for us, but for Vinegar Syndrome's Hong Kong releases as well. And it's something that, if only for our own releases, but also VSs, it's like, realizing just how bad a lot of the Hong
Yeah,
Kong subtitles are, as they came to us from the licensors, or just historically, and it's something that we fell into while working on Vinegar Syndrome's release of Ebola Syndrome,
okay.
which we produced the special features for that, and Pearl retranslated the entire film, and it was really like a learning moment for me, certainly, not to kind of receive that film as what it should be, which is much more
Uh,
of a dark comedy than like a abrasive uh, exploitation film, which it also is. But there's a lot of humor that was kind of scrubbed out for English audiences, that that Pearl worked really hard to sort of put back in the film. Yeah, definitely dark humor, but humor nonetheless. And
sure.
so from there, it kind of, yeah, it became a sort of a project of hers to contribute to that. Yeah.
Because getting into subtitles, I am always fascinated by language. I think part of it is when I was living in Indonesia, I picked the language up fairly quickly. I mean, it took me about a year and a half, but after about a year and a half, I was pretty fluent. I mean, I couldn't argue at the highest levels of government or anything like that, but I could get around and I was pretty conversant. Um, and I just became fascinated with language and the way that people communicate and the way that language sometimes restricts communication, and also some languages where it really opens it up. And to me, Cantonese has always been a language that I think is probably misunderstood in the West because, like, it's usually represented by either bad dubbing,
Yeah,
so you don't hear anything other than this kind of like tonal language, and then you just hear, American voices over it. Or bad subtitling to where it's like a flat language. Like there's not a lot of levels and depth to it, right?
totally.
Because it's just sort of like saying what's happening versus really like getting into the texture and stuff. So yeah, the Ebola syndrome. I'm so glad you brought that story up. I mean, do you find that that's one thing that Pearl's sort of passionate about is getting the right sort of context and meaning for a lot of this out in the new subtitle checks?
Totally. And I think what ends up happening, I think, as you said, the flattening is the problem, right? Is that you end up with very hastily made subtitles that kind of don't bother with puns, don't bother with
Yeah,
local references, do not bother with translating these references and the sort of these kind of inflections, and instead just kind of, yeah, go for the most base information
right.
possible, and then, yeah, scrub a lot of the personality of what is being said, which is definitely, a big part of Cantonese. And so, um, I always think back for as well, for like, it's almost as if like the film industry uh, is like 30 years behind in that department, because I always think back to the sort of, reading Dragon Ball as a kid, and it's like they're holding like an onigiri, like a rice ball, and it's like they translate as hamburger, and you're like, what in the world is this?
Yeah,
um
yeah.
as opposed to like translating it as either rice ball or onigiri with a translator note that explains what that is, and just letting
Hmm.
the audience do a bit of work, like not like
Yeah,
a huge amount of work, but a
yeah,
little
yeah.
bit of just like, oh, interesting,
But it's definitely
why
not a
is that word
hamburger.
not translated exactly? Definitely not a hamburger. And so it's these small things that we're also trying to do, and I think Pearl's gotten really good at. Yeah.
That's cool. The thing that turned me onto this from a linguistic perspective is I read Don Quixote, and it's a very funny book. But I've heard that if you speak Spanish, and especially if you speak classical Spanish, that it's a completely different book, and it's like the funniest book ever written.
Mm.
It's just like everything is a pun, everything is comedy. Like the whole thing is very poetic in the way that it's just like very for the time, very funny. And it's always made me want to learn classical Spanish just to get to read that in the way it's meant to be read, you know? So anyways, I love what you're saying.
No, totally. And that was the Ebola syndrome moment. I had only ever seen the film as this, you know, it's like this dangerous, subversive, secret
Hmm.
handshake movie that you feel gross about watching, and it's so mean-spirited and crude and raw. And you watch it, and it's like nasty, and that's part of the appeal or the legend of the film in the West. It's this piece of extreme cinema. And then the new translation just makes it clear that both Herman Yao and the producers and everybody involved, Anthony Wong certainly, with the sort of slapstick performance, they were all in on the joke. They were
Hmm.
trying to really push the envelope in this darkly comedic, really silly way, and that comes through the tone and the language that is easily kind of scrubbed.
That's cool.
I, yeah,
Closer to like Evil Dead or something as opposed to the way it
exactly,
was. Uh-huh.
as opposed to, I don't know,
Yeah, yeah.
something else.
Cool. Well, just a couple of quick fire questions getting to know you. Are you a collector yourself?
A little bit, not as hardcore as some of our audience may be, or some of the sort of OCN world suggests.
Uh-huh.
But definitely a casual collector. I mean, just also by virtue of being broke all the time. But actually, that's the thing. If you want to be a film collector in this way, don't work in film. um, but no, I do enjoy home video a lot, and definitely have like a couple hundred discs, most of which
Mm,
are in boxes, unfortunately. But and it's a constant struggle being here in Hong Kong to not like fill the house with discs.
mm.
The sort of the small living spaces is definitely kind of dialed down the collector impulse.
I
But
imagine.
um, but no, I would say, yeah, casual collector would be the answer.
What are the kind of movies you watch to challenge yourself? Like, what are you watching when you want like a challenging movie?
I think for me, it's recognizing the sort of areas of my cinephilia that I just haven't explored as much
Mm,
as I might have Asian cinema or genre cinema. Lately, I've been really wanting to dive more into Soviet era
okay.
filmmaking, Middle Eastern filmmaking as well, and things like that. Um, I think, yeah, it's sort of been a sort of professional deformation of in many ways, to where I've been almost singularly focused on both sort of festival fare
Hmm.
and Asian filmmaking and genre filmmaking. So it's really just recognizing, yeah, those
Well,
films I haven't yet seen.
as a quick aside, since you mentioned Middle Eastern filmmaking, have you seen the Deaf Crocodile release of Shahram Mokri's films?
No, but I'm a little familiar with his work, having seen. I believe I saw one, the name of
Was
which I forget,
so
Invasion. Um,
Vision? Okay.
so I had seen Invasion, but I haven't seen the rest of his films. Really interesting filmmaker. Yeah.
So Fish and Cat, especially coming from your background as like horror genre kind of stuff, um, please, if you can, watch Fish and Cat, and let me know what you think because
Cool.
I think it was one of the best things I've seen in 10 years, like maybe more. It's just like It's an anti-horror film, um, and it's also like whimsical at random times, and it's his thing of being one shot, so no edit,
Yeah.
no cuts. It's just I don't know, it just blew me away. So, anyways,
Yeah,
not,
no, he's that I've been meaning to get that release actually. He's really like kind of an underrated director, and Invasion was really fascinating.
yeah, Invasion's really
Yeah,
good. I agree.
yeah.
And then the other question, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, what do you watch to relax?
Um, I'll throw on like a silly Vinegar Syndrome movie, like
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
like no disrespect there, um, but um, but yeah, like a schlocky slasher
Yeah,
or any my backlog of sort of genre films is endless, so I'll just kind of throw one of those where I can sort of revel in the sort of aesthetic
yep.
base aesthetic pleasures, but kind of tune out at the same time because the film isn't giving me all that much, and like that kind of groove.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
What I increasingly have been calling some of these films is sort of like it's like the drone zone. It's like the film just drones along, and you're kind of a bit high too. I love when the film hits that note where you're kind of like a little bit kind of sluggish. Watching it. What is it that I watched of theirs recently that did that? Severed Arm kind of hit
Oh
that note for me,
yeah.
which I really enjoyed.
Yep.
Um, a blonde. Yeah, we watched Blonde Death,
Oh,
Bleeding
cool.
Skulls, Blonde Death, which actually I wouldn't qualify. I think that film gave me a lot more than I was expecting. I think that
Yeah.
film is really well written. It's and really funny, and definitely not what I was expecting from it. But at the same time, yeah, this sort of those kind of aesthetic pleasures I would call them.
I know
That is
exactly. Yeah.
yeah
One
yeah
of the ones I saw recently for me was Amityville 1992,
oh
and
yeah
then
yeah
it's about time,
yeah
and then the movie ends with them saying it's about time.
hell yeah yeah
I
yeah. And
love
then
that
you
stuff.
you clap slowly.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah
But no, I get it. The similar thing for me, I grew up listening to a lot of punk, and I got to a point where if I need to focus on something, I actually put on skate punk. And a
yeah
lot of
yeah
people don't understand it because they're like, it's so loud and like that. But you talk about being able to kind of drone out. For me, it's like very relaxing because I know what to expect. And so, like, I want that in that moment, right? If I need to focus, I want that where I'm not thinking at all. And it's like, it helps me kind of focus in. So I
totally. And it's something that I wish, um, or rather, I don't know. I feel like could be talked about a bit more in the sort of genre communities or genre fandom, or at least it's been my experience of it, which is to say, you know, I'm a genre guy through and through, but I feel like I'm also reaching a point in my life where the familiarity with it and the sort of the codes of the genre, the expectation, the formulas, right,
mhm.
that come with genre, are kind of kicking in, and it's both a blessing and a curse, right? It makes certain genres like horror or feel a bit more stale, familiar, but there's also a comfort in that
Yeah,
where it's you're either looking for things that are pushing the envelope or breaking the formula, or you can kind of, yeah, as you say, kind of zero in on this kind of comfort. It's almost like it's a good pair of slippers.
yeah.
And but I think I'm there in my relationship to genre, which, not to bring it back to our discussion, but which also maybe explains our approach with how we curate films, and also kind of, yeah, it's something that I always kind of wrestle with because it's kind of not a love hate so much as a sort of love and kind of trying to find what's next.
Well, keep doing what you're doing. There's something that is unique in everything that you put out that I've seen. Something that I think it does feel familiar, but then hits you with either a different angle on it or an unexpected third act that gets nuclear or something that's just different, unexpected musical number. So don't lose that part of your personality. I think it's made for some amazing releases, and I'll just say at the end, if anybody has not checked out anything from Kani, I would strongly recommend it because I think much in the way if you go through a Vinegar Syndrome film, there's usually something in it where you're like, ah, I see why they chose it. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
right? Like there's whether it's one scene or whether it's like a whole just like I remember the big one for me that I always tell people about. Have you ever seen The Caller?
The call?
Malcolm
No, I have
McDowell.
not seen. No, I have not seen that one.
Okay, so you go through, it's like, let's just say it's an hour and a half. I don't know. I think it's shorter than that even. It might be like 80 minutes, but
Yeah.
you go through like, let's say it's 90 minutes. You go through 85 minutes of that movie and you're like, okay. I mean, it's interesting, but like, okay. And then something happens in the last 5 minutes and you're like, holy shit, that was amazing. How did they do that? Like they just like, whoosh, they just like got you. And it's amazing. So anyways, um, I think you have a similar vibe in the movies you put out, where it's like everyone I've seen so far, I'm like, ah, I get it. Okay, I kind of understand a little bit more about why Kanye put this out. Now I have a face to put behind it, which is great. So please keep it up. Anything you want to tell people that I haven't asked about, or yeah, did I miss
Mm,
anything?
no, I think this is good. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate the support and the kind words, and yeah, thank you for a good talk.
Absolutely. No, it's been a pleasure, Ariel. I really appreciate it. And okay, well, we'll see you online.
Thank you. See you.